Joining me now is Clint Bolick, director of the Goldwater Institute's Sharf Norton Center for Constitutional Litigation. The Goldwater Institute filed a lawsuit challenging the CityNorth tax incentives. Also joining us is Grady Gammage, Jr., an attorney representing CityNorth. Good to have you both on the program. Thanks for joining us.
Nice to be here.
Clint, why did the Goldwater Institute decide to go after this particular agreement?
Well, this state was awash in subsidies to retailers, and the notion that the taxpayers need to basically bribe people to sell things to them is just ludicrous. Our Constitution has a gift clause, an anti-gift clause, that was the result of the framers saying that they didn't like railroad subsidies back at the founding of our state. That same clause prohibits taxpayer subsidies for, in this case, an ultra-luxury Taj Mahal.
Okay, Taj Mahal. Why was the appeals court decision wrong in your mind?
Well, the appeals court decision was kind of a shock to a lot of people. This has been a standard practice in Arizona for a long time, and indeed it's a standard practice throughout the United States that sales tax is used to rebate into projects to build infrastructure, to make those projects different, to incentivize the collection of more retail sales tax. There's been for about 25 years a test that's applied to those kind of things. We call it the Wistuber test, based on the case that was involved in. And it had these sort of two-part analysis to it, that this deal was crafted very carefully to fit within, you know, and that is, does the federal government, does the local government actually lose any money over the long term, and are they getting enough to sort of make up for the benefits that they're giving? The Court of Appeals went way beyond that and said, if the private party gets too much, that may in and of itself invalidate it, apart from the balance, and said that in analyzing this, you can't consider indirect benefits like tax revenues and jobs and all the things the cities have used this kind of agreement to incentivize. They say you can't do that anymore. So the implications of that go way beyond this particular decision.
Back to the general view here of just what we're talking for cities to give rebates and incentives for major projects that could help areas that might otherwise not get the projects and not get the revenue coming in.
Well, Ken Chevron put his finger on it. Really, who is paying for this? Well, regular taxpayers and small businesses that are the backbone of our economy but never get subsidies. But beyond that, government is terrible at picking economic winners and losers. In fact, right here in CityNorth, what started out as a subsidy really now looks like a bailout, because this is a white elephant. It's a ghost town out there. The Glendale Arena situation, likewise. For every success story, there's a failure story. You ought to leave these forces to the market, and especially for retailers. There's an adage that retail follows rooftops. If people move to Arizona, we're going to have an abundance of people trying to sell us things.
Well, CityNorth's not a white elephant. It's actually, no retail is doing very well in Arizona right now, but about 80% of the stores that have been built out there are occupied. About half of the rental units are occupied at this point. It's doing reasonably well. But it's important to realize none of the money's being paid so far. None of the money gets paid until the next phase is built. And it's only paid out of revenues that come from CityNorth. So we're not forking out any money right now to bail out CityNorth. If the next phase, which includes the department stores, takes place, then the payments would begin. And the decision that was made here, which was made by the City Council under the existing law, was that they would get a markedly better and different project if they allowed these revenues to be used to build structured parking. And that by doing that, they free up a lot of land for employment uses and office type uses. That's a kind of quintessential decision city councils make. City councils do pick winners and losers. They do it every time they put a road somewhere. They do it every time they pass a zoning ordinance. That's not what the gift clause is about. What the gift clause is about is cities giving away their money. And that's not what's happening here. It's not like the old railroad cases where cities would float bonds and give it to the railroad to build something. The city hasn't risked a dime in this deal yet. And they never do. They always get more money than is being paid to the developer.
Apples to apples as far as what we're talking about here when you're talking about history and what's happening with this particular development?
No, the railroads actually were the lifeblood of the economy. You certainly can't say that about a luxury shopping mall. So if the railroad subsidies were wrong, this is even more wrong. And with due respect to my friend Grady, The parking garage situation was a sham. They were required to build structured parking in order to attract Nordstroms. What this is about is keeping these retailers out of Scottsdale and in Phoenix. What the city should be doing is sharing their revenues instead of having a war over tax revenues. That way the tax money all ends up in the government's coffers, not in some Chicago developer's pocket.
Ted, we could go back and forth like this and never let you get a word in it. That Nordstrom didn't require the building of structured parking. The building of structured parking was a decision to make this something other than a conventional mall. And that is beneficial to my clients, it's beneficial to the city and to everyone else. So that's really not the case as to what happened there.
As far as, though, incentives, rebates, and these sorts of things, back to what we saw with Chevron's and the idea that if he opens an eatery at CityNorth, that would be subsidized in a way in which the downtown eatery would not be. Is that fair?
Well, that may or may not be the case, by the way. That depends on whether or not the landlord passes that benefit on to the tenants, which, frankly, I'm a tenant in a building that's had some subsidy, and we don't see a lot of that. The rent is typically set by the market.
You'd have a better chance of seeing it in CityNorth, though, wouldn't you?
I'm not sure that's right. I think the market is what sets the rent. So I don't think the issue here is about users. I think the issue is about what is the gift clause intended to protect the public against. And I think it's intended to protect the public against spending money the public already has, taking risks with public credit, floating bonds to build things and hoping that they'll be paid back. That, by the way, is the situation with the Coyotes. It's a very different situation than this one. The public hasn't risked anything here at this point.
I want to get to the public good because we're talking legalese and we're talking a particular product here and a particular project here. But in terms of the public good, if these kinds of subsidies and rebates, if it takes $3 to earn $2 in this sort of business, if it helps the public, helps development, helps get things in society that people seem to want but can't quite get developers to do without a little bit of a push, what's wrong with that?
Well, the fact is that's not the case, especially for retail. Retail will come no matter whether you subsidize it or not. And when you look at the actual record in this case, what you saw was a frenzied effort on the part of Phoenix to keep this development out of Scottsdale because of sales tax revenues. And as a result, the taxpayers will, if this project gets built, spend $97.4 million to give to a developer. The city hired a consultant to advise the city as to whether the subsidy was necessary. The consultant said no. The city ignored his recommendation.
That issue is no part of the Court of Appeals decision, and so it's really not relevant as we go to the Supreme Court. But the issue that I think is relevant here is who should decide. Who should decide when these are deals or good deals or bad deals? And I think the answer to that is it's a legislative decision. It's something our elected officials should decide. The Phoenix City Council voted for this. The Scottsdale City Council voted to subsidize the parking at Scottsdale Fashion Square. The Phoenix City Council previously voted to subsidize the parking at Kierland. There are reasons why you do this, and when you're on a city council, you listen to various consultants and arguments and other kinds of things, and like any legislator, you sort those things out and make a decision. That's where the decision should be made, not in a court. And I think it's kind of ironic that what we have here, and Clint's a wonderful lawyer, but what you have here is a lawyer beseeching judges to be very activist in interfering with economic regulation by a legislative body.
And should the council members who received campaign contributions from the developer recuse themselves? They didn't in this case. You need an independent arbiter to say, does this violate the rights of the taxpayers? And that can only be the court. The council cannot be the judge of its own actions. Very
quickly, last question. This is going to be appealed now, Supreme Court. The court could actually broaden this ruling. Are you concerned about that?
I think it's very unlikely that the court will do something broader than the Court of Appeals did. The Court of Appeals had a very sweeping reinterpretation of what has been settled in existing law that my clients relied upon in going into this deal. So I'm not particularly concerned about that. The first step is the court deciding whether or not they're even going to hear it. That's what they decide on June 1st. They could decide not to even hear it and let the Court of Appeals stand. I think if they decide to hear it, it's likely that they will modify the Court of Appeals.
Okay, we've got to stop it right there. Thank you so much for joining us, both of you.
Thanks for having us.